we'll just go for it. Okay. And welcome to another episode of the Bliss Tonic podcast. I have with me a very special guest, Aveen Banich, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I met Aveen a long time ago. I feel like on our paths through yoga, and our paths have kind of interwoven and connected over the years in a different way. And I love following your journey, and I'm just always inspired by the gifts that you bring to people in a completely deep way. So, welcome, Aveen.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay!
Yeah.
So we are lucky enough to get Aveen in person today, as she's in town in Eau Claire offering a workshop and in weekend intensive, the Alchemy of Yoga. So I'm hoping to take that this weekend as well. So Aveen, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, what you're currently doing, and then we'll get into a little bit about how you got where you are, your spiritual journey of awakening.
That sounds great. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for having me. It's really nice to be back in Eau Claire. So we lived here for 10 years, and we moved to Colorado a little over 2 years now. And so I live in the Springs, and I practice different things there. When someone says, like, what are you doing? I never know what to lead with, because I'm a mom of 4 kids, and that seems to be my biggest job. But I am a yoga teacher, and I'm a sound healer and a Reiki master. And then I'm also a part-time practicing ophthalmologist. So I wear a lot of different hats. And what I have tried to do is kind of start to recognize that earlier in my journey, or when I was younger, everything was kind of in a separate box. And I found that to be super depleting energetically. Like, I'd take off one hat to put on another one. So these days I'm really working to kind of have no little divides and just sort of practice yoga, whatever I'm doing. And it's been really energizing for me.
That's so amazing. I love that, and I love that you said that, because I feel that in a lot of ways as well, where it's like, well, what do I do?
Right.
And I mean, maybe it's not widely understood, but I feel like, oh, everything is yoga. Everything I do can fit under this umbrella of yoga, being curious and just getting to know myself more through life experiences.
Exactly. Yeah. Be a polymath yogi.
Yeah, and I definitely have found a similar sense of healing, just embodying like this. These are all the parts of me, and it doesn't feel as good when I try to like only be a yoga teacher and hide these other elements that I'm doing, and then only be a performer and then not bring the yoga into it. And so it's been really healing to kind of weave that all together into just, this is who I am.
Yeah, it's definitely a more holistic and authentic approach, I think.
Yeah. And I definitely forgot to when I introduced you, say like, oh, what title would I give her when I introduced her? And spiritual mentor really is the thing that pops up. And you didn't really say it when you were saying I wear all of these hats, but I would say like being an intuitive is one of your gifts.
Yeah, I think everyone has the ability to be intuitive. So it's kind of like vision, like I work with the eyes. And I really do feel like intuition, I mean, the yogis knew a lot about this. A lot of ancient traditions did. And so I feel that just as a society, we're a little bit disconnected from that. We tend to think that that's something special, when actually I think that's just who we are.
Yes.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a little bit about your path to remembering your abilities and intuition and refining your senses?
Yeah, so my youngest just turned 11. So he was born premature and pretty traumatically, and spent a lot of time in the NICU, and it was a time in my life where I always talk about plates in the air. So I married to a wonderful man who's also a surgeon, and up until that point I really felt like I was in control. Ridiculously, I felt like, I could do things. I could keep the plates spinning. And after James was born, it was just a really challenging moment in my life because I understood that I wasn't in control, and that messed with me for a while in the best way possible, I like to say. And when he was about a year old, I had, I guess what I would call a spiritual awakening. I started to, the very night that it happened, we were sitting with our dear friends who lived next door with us at the time, having just great conversation. And it was like a deep conversation. And I remember asking myself the question, like, what if it's all true? And we were talking about angels, and we were talking about a lot of different spiritual things, and I allowed myself in a moment to kind of take my blinders off. I didn't have any answers, but it was like, I think a lot of us, it takes a lot of life force energy to not see the wonder that's around us. And so it was in that moment of asking that question that kind of everything opened up for me. We were walking home that night, and I saw this beautiful white wolf bounding towards me. It was kind of glowing. And I was an ophthalmologist at the time, so there was a period where I was really wrestling with, was I going crazy? I actually sat down at the computer that night and Googled like visual hallucinations as a presenting sign of psychosis, because I was seeing patients with brain tumors, and that sometimes happened. But in my heart, I kind of knew that that it was true. And when I say what was true, that there is, that especially with our vision, there's a very narrow bandwidth of what we can see, but that's not all there is. And so it really opened me to the magic and the fullness that's around us in a really beautiful way. And it expanded my heart as well, because everything was, like everything is created with vibration and light, and it's so beautiful. And we think we're separate, and we're not. And so that was like the main take home from, I went through a period of about 8 months where I would like sit down and just fall into meditation, and I did not meditate. I was not seeking at that time. But I would just fall into these states of oneness, and it was so beautiful. It sounds maybe a little corny, but I think it's the fundamental reality. And this idea that we're separate, or that you're different from me so that I can't love you, is just not true. And so there's a before that time in my life and an after. And so since that time, well, when it started, I really started seeking. I wouldn't have called myself a seeker before that time, but I started reading. I started with the Christian mystics because I was raised Catholic, and that was familiar language to me. And I found a lot of, I read this book called The Cloud of Unknowing. I think that was the first book. That is a book from maybe the 14th century that nobody knows who wrote it, but it's like a mystic's account. So there's a lot of similarities in mystics throughout tradition. So I started there, and then I found yoga. I was kind of seeking language to explain what had happened to me, and to find other paths that had a common similarity. And what you really realize is you pull on one thread, and they're all connected. So so I studied yoga. I became a yoga instructor, and I studied Reiki, the universal life force healing energy, and I just studied anything I could find. And the other thing is that in the beginning, I would say for those who are on a spiritual journey, in the beginning, I really struggled with, and so I think that's why I led with this idea of wholeness, or there was like that part of me, and then there was the scientist part. I was a physician, and so kind of there was a brick wall between those two things, and that really didn't serve me in any way. It actually created suffering for me. But for a long time, I didn't know how to blend or merge those two things. So I would say a lot of people are having these experiences. Like, we think that what's really unusual is that we have these experiences of oneness, and then we think we're alone. It's like, I think so many people are having, and the experiences can look so different, and they can be a moment in a yoga class, or like looking at a sunrise, or it can be more dramatic, but you're not alone in these experiences. What we're just living in a society where we're conditioned to not talk about it.
Yeah, and I feel like too, and this is just personally, like when I have those experiences of like, you can say we're all one, but when you're like, no, love everyone and you just are overcome with the experience of it. And then you have like go back to your regular world and maybe the integration process isn't as cohesive as it could be, and then doubt creeps in, and as you know, that is one of the hindrances on the path of yoga is doubt. And I was just thinking about this week of like, okay, I remember my first spiritual awakening, and I look back at it now and I'm like, did that stuff happen to me? Like, was I going crazy? Like, what was that all about? Is that real? I don't have those experiences anymore, but I don't need those fear-based experiences of like stepping into my power and all of that. So I definitely noticed this sense of like doubt, and it takes away some of the power of those experiences. So what do you have to say about like overcoming doubt and the integration process? Because it seems like you went full on, in, and you haven't looked back.
Oh, I've made so many mistakes.
Okay, that's super great to hear.
Yeah. So when I said I became a seeker, like I became a seeker.
Yeah.
I started doing a lot of meditative practices. I found a teacher. I was meditating hours a day, and I think a lot of times when we're quote unquote spiritual, I shouldn't speak for other people. I know for me, it was like I lost embodiment for a while, and I valued spiritual stuff. I valued meditative experiences and this expansion into this feeling of oneness more than we would say the mundane. And that is a recipe, especially because I chose to embody in this life as a householder. I have 4 children, I'm married, I have a very busy, active life, and I love my life. And so for a while, and in a lot of spiritual tradition, a lot of the practices were for ascetics, so people who are going to go off, like be sadhus in the woods or go into the caves. And that is just not who I was. And so there was a time where I felt off balance with that. And so I pulled back from that, and I really now work to do practices that are more for the householder. So when I say householder, I just mean someone like you and I who are in the world. And so we need practices that help connect us to our, spiritual or higher self. Really, we're always connected, but help us remember. But we also need practices to integrate and embody. And I think, especially when we're kind of newer on this path, we want the highs, right? And the longer I go, the more I really appreciate the integrated whole. So and once we start to go there, it's like every great hero's journey, right? You come back to where you started and you realize, like, it sounds so cheesy, but like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, like we had it all along, right? And so, that's a really sweet place to be.
Yeah, and just like bringing that to just yoga philosophy is if your yoga practice isn't making you a better embodied human, then is it really working for you?
Right, and that what may have worked for you 5 years ago, right? So it's the how, it's the why, rather than the what.
Yeah.
Like your practice, like what you're doing is less important than why you're doing it, and we need to have some flexibility and flow. And if you're a new mom, if you have a toddler, your yoga practice is going to look really different perhaps than it did 5 years ago, and that living like as a whole being is responding to that.
Absolutely, and it's definitely something that I personally have been working on with this like intense practice I had leading up to baby, and it was just like it was so amazing. I was so deeply steeped in it, felt really great, and then the baby comes and I'm like, okay, I am going to take a breath before I look at my phone. I'm going to have gratitude when I crawl into bed and just like feel that love grow a little bit. And it does, like, I do notice a little sense of like suffering in the context of like guilt, or like I should be back in my meditation practice in a more deeply steeped way like I was, when really it's the progression and the changing of the practice with what's showing up in life.
Yeah, and my yoga teacher, Jessica Patterson, loves this quote, and I cannot remember who it's attributed to, but it's basically, yoga is the practice of missing nothing. And so if you have a toddler, and there's no better way to be in the present moment, but we judge, and there's a hierarchy to what we think is, that we should be sitting in meditation for an hour, or we need to do a 60-minute practice on our mat, and that's pretty harsh towards ourselves when we maybe are not getting sleep. And so yeah, I would say that you're like in an advanced course of yoga at the moment.
Correct. Yes, correct. I would say that in a lot of ways I'm like putting myself in this like karmic fire. And so there's like in Tantra, it's the V-yoga and Sam yoga, the separate, like go to the cave, go to the woods, go to your meditation practice in a deep way, and remember that you are more than just this body and just your habits and the things that you do in the mundane. And then Sam yoga is to like bring it to the world, and how do you integrate? It's almost like how well is this practice going to serve you when you're just living your daily life, and not when you're separate from the things going on. So I really love that quote of missing nothing, and that feels really good to.
Well, and I think we can't really speak about yoga or spiritual practice without the idea of service. I think it's really imbalanced without it. And so I think there's also, sometimes we can get really self-involved when we're on our journey, you know what I mean? When really, if we don't offer back, if we just consume, whether it's practice or study of sacred texts, and we don't offer in service, there's a stagnancy that happens. And so it is really important to, like right now you're in service to your son, and that's pretty sacred.
Yeah, for sure. I completely understand that. I have been totally caught in that loop of just, me and my practice, and it for sure, no effort is wasted on this path, and it does show up in other ways, but it's something too that I am remembering in my current practice right now is I surrender to what is, being asked of me to be of the highest service to myself and all beings as we're connected. And that's something that has just been really like changing my energy in a way of just remembering that. And just on that note too, is to not sink into self-judgment when you notice that that's where you are, because it isn't a cycle in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think, and when we can be of service, and that sounds really lofty, but it can be, it is really practical. It's there's a spaciousness that's created within us so that we can open to more of the universe moving through us. Whereas if we, there have also been times in my life where I felt really blocked or closed or compressed is how I feel it energetically. And I always laugh. My dad was a yogi, and he didn't know it because he's really, he does not practice yoga, but I remember in high school, I was having some drama over a boy, and I was kind of woe is meing, and his advice to me was, get outside of myself, and go do something for someone else. And at the time, of course, as like a 17-year-old, I was so ticked, but that's advice that I hold to this day, because that's really the way, like if you find you're cycling and you can't, you're exploring your spirituality, whatever that means to you, and you're not getting anywhere, quote unquote, go out and be of service in some way for someone else, and the way will open.
Yes, that's such good advice. I love it. And I love how you described it as spaciousness, as, like I said, this is something that I like very recently am remembering and getting back into the cycle of again. And that's what it feels like, is I have this spaciousness, and with that sense of surrender as well of like whatever is being asked of me, it has helped me look at things that have like, okay, why did this thing happen that was obviously, this is not what I want. You know, this outcome was not what I wanted, and how is that a message for me? How can I bring that back inwards and say, okay, maybe I'm being redirected, maybe I'm being shown what I don't want, who knows, you know, but just to pay attention to that and honor the emotional state of like disappointment, but then come back into that broader space of service and like, well, if this isn't where I'm meant to be, then I'll be guided to where I am.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes when I say service, it's even being able, especially in the world that we're living in right now, which is so reactive, right? I mean, news drops and things change, but I feel like if you can be a coherent human being, if you can, even if you're aware, like you said, of your disappointment, that creates the spaciousness that's required so you can respond to someone or something or some situation rather than react without thinking or judging. And so you can use, I mean, being of service is, yes, you know, making your kids breakfast and doing other good acts in the world, but it's also just working for your own coherence so that you can hold your center as life around seems to maybe not be.
Yes. And even, you know, and on that point, and when we're working on that, contemplating it in our lives, our reactions, we will sometimes and oftentimes still have the reactions, but then we'll like retract the energy behind the reaction in faster and faster ways. Like just this morning, my baby, and I was like, okay, this is the last pouch of food, and then we're gonna go to daycare, and it's beets, and it's just like, okay, you're dressed for the day, and he starts, you know, shaking his pouch, and I'm just like, and he's just like, and then he does it one more time, and it just goes everywhere, and it's like, no, and then it's like, okay, it's okay, like, I actually have a secondary shirt, we're gonna be fine, like, you know, but it was just like a, God, that's what I was trying to tell you not to do, but he's a toddler, he doesn't understand, and then just like a moment of like, no, you could see his face too, of just like, what do you mean? You know, that was fun. Like,
He's your teacher.
Oh, so much, yeah. So, do you have any advice for dispelling doubt specifically? Like, a lot of people that I know that listen to this podcast have had experiences, and then, you know, contemplate those experiences and doubt whether, you know, the validity, or just have a lack of confidence in, you know, the reality or the truth.
Yeah, so what would I say to that? I think sometimes doubt can serve us. I think not all the time, but sometimes doubt is pointing towards something that's unresolved. The way I like to think of the energetic body is that we just have kind of knots or areas where we're sort of not yet unraveled or spacious. And so I think it's okay to have doubt. I think it's when we push doubt down sometimes that it actually gains more power. It's like just bring it into the lights, really look at what's going on. Oftentimes too, I know for me, when I first started having experiences, again, it goes back to that feeling like there were partitions in my life. And so, you know, science is showing us that there are so many realities. There are so many, that you and I are multi-dimensional beings, that we may be having a conversation in this dimension and higher dimensions. And so, so anything is possible. I think when we feel like I know in my experience, when I felt like I needed to defend somehow my experience, and I don't know who I was defending it against, my own ego, I think, that created suffering. And when I say suffering, it shows up for different people, but so I just think it may point to an area that is ready, and right, I think it's that there's a Tibetan monks, like revel when doubt or when something rises, because it means, oh, it's coming to the surface and now I can work with it. So it's not something to run from. I think it's if we give ourselves enough embodied stillness, because I think that is required at times, to just kind of look from all directions and see what we can witness, and then bring a sense of compassion to it. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I think that I think it's natural. I think sometimes it can be helpful. And I would say to continue your practice.
That's always the answer, isn't it?
It is, unfortunately. Because, right, because this too shall pass or change. So, give it another 6 months and it won't be doubt, it will be frustration, or so these are all just, we are on this great wild adventure, and if it were always the same, it would get super boring. That's not what we signed up for. And so do you want to doubt, can you just speak maybe to what type of doubt specifically? You're doubting yourself?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I do book Oracle, and right before this I was like, okay, and I would go into the Yoga Sutras, the secret of the sutras, and I opened up to a passage, and it was specifically about talking about the obstacles of yoga and how that shows up via shakiness and shakiness of limbs, and how that is represented as a lack of confidence, and it is lack of confidence in ourselves, in our teachers, in our mentors, in the process, in our own ability to perceive reality. And that's kind of what I feel when I contemplate like doubt in my experiences. It's really not trusting myself, and not trusting that what I perceived in the past was something that actually happened. That's more, you know what I mean, when we have those like awakening experiences that are energetic in nature, and then we're not in that energy anymore. The
part of you that can perceive in this moment is still in that energy, you just can't perceive it, right? So that kind of doubt is sort of, I've been there. So when I said before, I think there was a time where I was sort of chasing experience, because you have those experiences of oneness are so powerful and beautiful. And I haven't forgotten, so I don't doubt that experience, but there was a time when I was motivated to almost stay there. And then, those experiences are always a gift of grace. And so you can't, I wasn't seeking, there wasn't anything. It's kind of ironic because it sort of happened spontaneously to me, and then I thought, oh, if I do enough different practices, it'll happen again. And sometimes glimmers of it did, but really I feel that those are these beautiful glimpses to just help us remember to fully embody here and live the life that we're meant to live here. And the more fully we embody and engage with our friends and our family and our community and the natural world, we're being embodied, I feel, is a real gift. I think we wanted to be here. And we forget that part too. And so if you're spiritually, if you're energetically sensitive, sometimes it can feel kind of overwhelming here, a little bit harsh sometimes. But I think that we're supposed to dive into the full catastrophe of it, and that's really the way to become whole with it. Because like if you were flipping into samadhi all the time when you had a toddler, it wouldn't be super helpful.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to me that just shows up as like lately just immense gratitude of like, I wake up and I'm like, I get to be your mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I like am tearing up saying that, like it's like, I get to be your mom today. Like, how did I get so lucky? Yeah, so.
And hugs and
Yes.
What's better than that, right? But I do think that there is this idea, and it's whether it's, I don't know where it comes from, religion but that spiritual is better than embodied, right? And so we may say, oh, I don't feel that way, but we may have some programming that says otherwise. And so I think right now that's my path, is to blend both and not place one above the other.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah.
And that's all about what I'm hoping to spread and share with this whole podcast, is like, these are all the human experiences. Here's a different way that we can look at them in order to integrate the soul, integrate our higher self, integrate who we really are and who we are right now in this lifetime with all of the coverings.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say to, this is common, there have been books upon books written on this subject of, well, I'm not intuitive, I'm not psychic, and how to, so what would be your advice to somebody who is wanting these experiences that we're talking about, where we remember, oh, I'm more than just the mundane, and then integrating? What would you say, how could they do that? How could they start that path or refine it?
Well, again, I think certain experiences are just gifts, but I do think that we can create the circumstances to help set ourselves up. Miracles are happening all the time, right? It's just, are we aware enough of them? And so I think the advice probably isn't going to be super sexy, but it's first to slow down. I don't think that we can begin anything new until we pause. And so, and that doesn't have to look like a 45-minute meditation practice, but it has to be a time where you're not scrolling on your phone, you're not doing 10 things at the same time. And so that in and of itself is the practice. And whether that's yoga for you, whether that's, working out, or you can do things to prepare for it. But I do think it requires stillness of some kind, and then an embodiment. So I think a lot of us are not super embodied. We're living from the neck up, and we're externalizing onto screens. And so I think being in the natural world, slowing down, gratitude, like you said, like when you teared up, like that's a way to open yourself up and shift your energy almost instantly. Getting in that kind of a practice. I do think community, so I don't think we're meant to do this alone. I think relationship, whether it's with our children or a friend or a loved one or a pet, can also just kind of start to put us in that place. And then I would say, like, intuition, why? Like there's a lot of seeking or trying to be psychic, and I would, just like your practice with yoga, the why, I think the why is super important. Like, what are you trying to find answers to? Because intuition it's so broad, and it's just such a natural part of who we are, that we can also outsource our intuition. And so getting really centered in yourself. We live in a culture where a lot of our energy is kind of towards the periphery. We're looking for external validation, or we're looking for external advice, when really, like, we're a universe unto ourselves. And so centering yourself, creating a pause in your day to listen to the mind chatter to begin, and then in my experience, the intuition comes as a whisper. It's not going to knock you over the head right away, and at first you're not going to believe it. And so maybe just have a journal and just write down impressions, and take a little bit of time and set the intention to be open to your own advice, to your own heart.
I love that, and I think the journaling component is really big in overcoming doubt as well on that path, as that helps us remember all of the people we've been along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah, and doing something like morning pages or soul journaling, where you just literally put your sometimes we do this in retreats. You know, you set your timer for 5 or 10 minutes and you put your pen to paper and you just don't pick it up and you don't care what you're writing. It's like just, blah, like you're getting it all out, and you don't read it right away either. You read it the next day, and sometimes you start to say like, wow, where did that come from? And that's intuition.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just, you know, your laundry list or whatever, but that can be a way, because we're really just trying to remember and connect to ourselves. It's not like we have to go outside of ourselves. We're pretty stimulated.
Yeah, and I feel like too, when I've done free writing, and then all of a sudden, you know, like the changes, and I'm like, okay, that's not, my mind had an idea of what word was coming next, and then it was like, that's not what was showed up, you know? But then I feel like, and this is a theme as well with seekers, who are seeking also the external validation, which I feel like we all are in some way, is this contrast of like diving into those messages and like a grain of salt. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so this crazy message came through, what does it all mean? You know, versus like, oh, very interesting. Like, I don't know what it means, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and being okay to stay in the liminal space. So the liminal space for me is sort of the space of not knowing. It's the space between, it's the space before and after. And it's a super rich space for creativity, for compassion, for all of these beautiful emotions that can emerge. Also for shadow work, you know, to see what's really going on. And so, yeah, I would say to begin with, like approaching intuition from that sense of wholeness and knowing that that your soul or your higher self, or however you want to put it, wants to connect with your mind, right? And so if you just hold that, then it will come, and it may come in totally different. Like your messages may be so out there, a song on the radio, you know, your friend says, someone that you're in a relationship with kind of says something right at the right moment, or but you'll receive the guidance that you need. We're so guided all the time. We're never not guided. Yeah. We can feel lost, we can feel blocked, but we're never not guided.
Yeah. A lot of these messages are very synchronistic for me right now. I'm reading Audible audiobook Super Attractor by Gabby Bernstein.
Oh, I haven't read that one yet.
Oh my gosh, a lot of the things you're saying are very much in alignment and repeating things that I've recently listened to from them. I know, I'm just like, all right, these are definitely messages, and I love, and this happens a lot when I'm listening to like podcasts or audiobooks, and then I'll like pause and be contemplating an issue, and then like hit play, and it's like, wow, how did you know that? I had to wait to listen to that until this moment when this experience was happening, and I was like,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the key for me is that we all have different wounds, you know, and I think we come here to work them out or heal them or whatever, and I think worthiness is a big wound for many people. Mm-hmm. And when we have that wound, if we don't feel that we're worthy somehow, then even if we, you know, we receive these beautiful messages, we have these experiences, and we don't always think we're worthy of them. And so worthiness, and just sometimes I think remembering or shining a light on the fact that maybe that is a wound, and maybe that's a universal human wound, I don't know. But I think that when you talk about doubt and you know, not listening to our guidance, I think that's at the root for many of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely feel that, and it's interesting too, going, you know, to all of these maybe smaller wounds, and then coming down to it, and a lot of them have these like really base human nature wounds, you know, that we all have different like variations of it and ways that it shows up in our life, but when you get down to it, it's oh, we all have this sense of unworthiness, and it could maybe show up for me, like in the context of money. We had a financial psychologist on a couple weeks ago, and it was like, oh, okay, I realize how I'm
That's
acting.
ringing a bell.
Yeah, a lot of the things of her talking about working with street homelessness and how they react to when they do have money, and they're like, oh, I'm gonna treat everybody, to this and spend and everything. And I'm like, oh, okay, I see that within myself, and definitely I think it comes down to unworthiness in a lot of ways. So I love how doing that, and that would be maybe one approach to shadow work, or one way to look at shadow work is looking at all these wounds. And what I love about shadow work within the context of community and being in the sharing and circles is you get to just see like, oh, this is just like being human.
Exactly.
It's just a part of being human.
Yeah,
and
it's similar
okay.
to what we were talking about before, that when you first have experiences, you're wowed, and then you're like, oh, people are gonna think I'm crazy if I share this. And so Sangha or community, right, is so healing. And it's funny because Eau Claire creates very beautiful Sangha. It's fun to be back here and to feel that energy. It's not like that everywhere. And so to be grateful that you're here.
Yeah, it's so interesting. When I first moved back in 2012, it was like kicking and screaming, like I'm not going back to my mom's basement. Like, this sucks. People think they know me here and they don't, and and I'm obviously not that person, but I am, but I'm not. And so I definitely went through like this dark period of like, let me just shut off all the things that happened in order to just fit in a lot of ways. And I really am grateful for the community that has unfolded around me, and just the support. And I would not be able to raise a baby or a toddler alone, and I'm just so grateful for all the aunties out there who even just holding, talking, acknowledging, loving, anything to feel like supported is huge.
Well, and I'm doing a training with Donnie Epstein, who created Network Spinal Chiropractic, called Alchemy this year, and he has this great saying. He talks about how that we have to become a somebody before we ultimately become a nobody. And that's a really common, like, that's in a lot of traditions too. And so this idea that, when you first moved back here, you were at the age too where ego, you needed to create who you were, right? That's super important on our path. And eventually we recognize, one of my greatest spiritual experiences was this moment I had where I sort of expanded and saw, I couldn't really recognize myself as a light, although I think I was, but just as far as I could see was this sort of ocean of stars that were all connected, and I just somehow knew it was you and other people I loved, and humanity, really. And so that we're all part of this ocean. And so when we say like everything is one, it truly is, but we're playing this game. We've cloaked ourselves to come and have an experience and contract into an individual form. And it's like the game is to remember, and we get these glimpses, and then we forget, and then we glimpse again, and but we wanted to play this game.
And in the end, even those glimpses have to be released back into the ocean. I love it. So before we started recording, you shared a little message with me that's like, okay, I don't know. But would you mind sharing that again, or whatever's coming through?
Do you want me to share that message?
I don't mind.
Well, no,
or whatever. Whatever you feel like.
No, when I was kind of just preparing for this, you have a really beautiful young female energy in your field, and I don't know how much you want me to say about this on your podcast, but
you can be. I'm open, so whatever you
so
want.
So I asked if you were planning to have a little sibling for your child. Off camera, I would like to say.
Yes.
And either way, it's just she's a really beautiful, bright energy, kind of like you, very sparkly. So,
And those of you may not know, some of you do, but yeah, 2 years ago, pretty much 2.5 years ago, I had a session with Aveen when I was traveling in Florida and just like felt like, I just need to remember, I need this guidance right now. And you had a lot of really beautiful things to say to me that actually sparked the direction of my life. The first one was, just stuff with like, father energy, and like you've done this dance many lifetimes, and it sparked a big part of my life that led me to create an online program about judgment and just embracing people where they are, not needing them to change to meet you. And that was a moment that I got a lot of like podcasts that was like, when you're judging somebody, you're judging yourself. It was just like, okay. And then a song came on that was just like the same thing as like, I hear you, I'm working on it. And then you also were like, there's a baby for you. It's like, oh man, okay, well, only if I can go to India and be financially secure and this list of 10 million things, and then I'll have a baby. Nothing happened. The energy was fine, I'll do it. But, yeah, so, yeah.
Well, and it's so fun because we haven't really, I don't live here, and so we haven't spoken much, but just to watch you, even like through Facebook, you are like such a beautiful mother. And I think that the joy that you bring to it and just the authenticity, I think has helped so many people. So keep shining for sure.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That means a lot.
And he is so gorgeous and just beautiful.
And he definitely picked his name. Like it started as a joke. And then I was like, no, that's his name. Like, I think I wanted to name him his middle name, which is Orion, because it was under, like, I was on a journey following Orion's belt down south, and it was just like a spiritual path. I don't know. And so I was like, Orion, because it was a part of that whole awakening. And it was just like joking, like, Riot from the band Pussy Riot at Eau Claire Fest, that I was like, I should name him jokingly after one of the bands at Eau Claire Fest, and then I'll really be a hipster. And I was like, testing out all the names. I was like, Pussy Riot. Okay, that's okay. I mean, I don't know. And then we tried out a whole bunch of other names, and it just didn't fit.
He's Riot.
Riot Orion. So
it's so great.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you so much for taking this time, and I feel like so many jewels of wisdom came through for everybody, so thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Michelle. It was really fun.
So before we log off, can you share a little bit about how people can connect with you, your offerings, via distance, the ones that maybe people don't have to be in Colorado for?
I'm coming back to do a retreat at the Christine Center October 23rd through the 25th, the weekend. That's always really fun. That's a beautiful space. And then I have a website. It's just aveenbanich.com, and I do, I call it transformational mentoring with people, one-on-one. We can do it via Zoom. And then I teach locally in Colorado Springs as well, but I'm super excited to be back this weekend too.
Yay, and I am looking forward to connecting with you this weekend.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. Yay! Oh my gosh.
So easy.
I know. Just like, don't work it up in your head.
Yeah,
it's
just
like
go
for it. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yay! I appreciate that so much.
So great. So are you having a lot of doubt? And I didn't know how much to go into it. So I was with a spiritual teacher who was like, I wasn't sure by the end if he was light or dark, like if what he was. And so I do think doubt can be super helpful in certain situations, and so that's why I said that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's kind of like your soul saying, wake the hell up. But what are you doubting?
No, I just like have been going through, so when I was living in Canada, I had all of these experiences of like dealing with dark energy. Like that was my awakening though. That my awakening was like, I woke up to a shadow figure. And then it was just like I heard it in my head, you know, it was like very real. And then going through this path of like these two sisters kind of guided me, and it was always like no to low vibrational negative and evil energy, you know, and that was that.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a lot of fear in the beginning of my path, so you know, looking back, that makes sense. But then I like, wow, like I was having these dreams where I was going to the Sirius star system and like you know, learning, downloading the history of like everything, you know, like crazy things. And you know, then it's like, was that a result of my surroundings, or you know what I mean? So I deal with doubt sometimes in regards to like, yeah, I guess that part of my life where it was like a lot of psychic energy awakening, but maybe it's not that I want that right now in that way, because I'm not in that space of like fear as often.
Yeah.
I'm definitely in fear always, but aren't we all a little bit?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I don't know, there's that, and then yeah, so in June I started stripping.
Okay.
And that has been so wild. Oh my gosh, I'm just like I mean, I literally I was sitting on the couch talking with this guy about like, yeah, all of these things, you know, and he's just like, oh, I never thought about that, you know, and just like bringing it there, and not always, you know, sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm lost, oh, here I am, oh, I'm of service, oh, I'm serving myself. And so it's been such a like, gosh, spiritual playground of like, okay, and then also I'm like at this space, I'm like, okay, I learned a lot, but do I need to be in the karmic fire like that intensely, you know, in the world? That, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. Like, I learned a lot, there was a lot.
You mean stripping?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, so let me just